Greetings, horror fans, and welcome to BitBlitz Horror. Tonight we're diving into The Bloodstained Legacy, a chilling tale of dark family secrets and supernatural vengeance. Before we begin, remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more terrifying stories. Now brace yourselves as we uncover the horrors that await in this haunting narrative. Let the nightmare begin. I never expected my grandfather's final words to shatter my world. As I sat by his bedside, holding his frail hand, I couldn't have imagined the horror that was about to unfold. My name is Linda, and I had always admired my grandfather. He was a decorated war hero, a man of honor and integrity. Or so I thought. As his life ebbed away in that sterile hospital room, he beckoned me closer, his rheumy eyes filled with a desperation I had never seen before. "Linda," he wheezed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need to tell you something. A secret I've carried for far too long." I leaned in, my heart racing. What could be so important that he needed to share it now, in his final moments? "During the war," he began, his words coming in labored gasps, "I did something terrible. We were ordered to clear a village. But it wasn't just enemy combatants. There were civilians. Women. Children." My blood ran cold. This couldn't be true. Not my grandfather. Not the man I had looked up to my entire life. "We were told they were collaborators," he continued, his grip on my hand tightening. "But they were innocent. I knew it then, and I know it now. I pulled the trigger. I can still hear their screams." Tears welled up in my eyes. I wanted to pull away, to run from this room and the horrifying truth it contained. But I couldn't move. "That's not all," he said, his voice growing weaker. "The guilt, it followed me home. It haunted me. And then, one night I saw them." "Saw who?" I asked, my voice trembling. "The villagers. The ones we killed. They were in our house, Linda. Watching. Waiting." A chill ran down my spine. I had spent countless summers in that old house, never knowing the darkness that lurked within its walls. "They're still there," he whispered, his eyes wide with fear. "Waiting for me to join them. But now they'll be waiting for you." With those final words, my grandfather's hand went limp in mine. The heart monitor flatlined, its steady beep a stark contrast to the chaos in my mind. I left the hospital in a daze, my grandfather's confession replaying in my head. It couldn't be true. It had to be the ramblings of a dying man, his mind clouded by medication and fear. But as I drove to his house, my inheritance, according to his will, a sense of dread settled over me. The old Victorian stood silhouetted against the setting sun, its windows dark and uninviting. I hesitated at the front door, key in hand. Did I really want to go inside? To face whatever horrors might be waiting for me? But I had to know the truth. I had to see for myself. The door creaked open, revealing a musty interior that smelled of old books and pipe tobacco. Everything was exactly as I remembered it from my childhood visits. The worn leather armchair where Grandpa used to tell me stories. The old grandfather clock in the corner, its steady ticking a comforting presence. But now, every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump. I made my way upstairs, to my grandfather's study. If there was any evidence of his wartime atrocities, it would be there. The room was cluttered with memorabilia, medals, photographs, old maps. I began rifling through drawers, searching for anything that might corroborate his story. In the bottom drawer of his desk, I found a locked box. My hands shook as I tried key after key from the ring he had left me. Finally, one fit. Inside the box was a stack of yellowed papers. As I read through them, my horror grew. They were official reports, detailing the clearing of the village my grandfather had mentioned. But these reports had been altered, sanitized. The original text, visible beneath hurried crossings out, told a different story. A story of massacre, of war crimes. Nausea welled up in me. I stumbled to the bathroom, barely making it in time. As I splashed water on my face, trying to calm myself, I caught a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision. I spun around, heart pounding. But there was nothing there. Just the empty hallway. I told myself I was imagining things, that the stress and shock were getting to me. But as I made my way back to the study, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of paranoia and fear. Every time I thought I saw something, a figure at the end of the hall, a face in a window, it would vanish when I looked directly at it. I told myself it was just my imagination, fueled by my grandfather's deathbed confession. But as night fell and shadows lengthened, my certainty began to waver. I decided to spend the night. It was foolish, perhaps, but I needed answers. I needed to know if there was any truth to my grandfather's ramblings about the villagers haunting this house. Sleep didn't come easily. Every creak and groan of the old house had me sitting bolt upright, straining my eyes in the darkness. But eventually, exhaustion won out, and I drifted off into an uneasy slumber. I woke with a start, heart pounding. Something had roused me, but I couldn't say what. The room was pitch black, the kind of darkness that seems to press against your eyeballs, and then I heard it. A soft shuffling sound, coming from the corner of the room. I froze, hardly daring to breathe. The shuffling grew closer, accompanied by a sound that made my blood run cold, the quiet sobbing of a child. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Is someone there?" The sobbing stopped abruptly. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then, a voice spoke directly into my ear, so close I could feel the breath on my skin. "You are not him," it said in heavily accented English. "But you carry his blood," I screamed, scrambling out of bed and fumbling for the light switch. When the room flooded with light, I was alone. But the air was thick with the scent of gunpowder and something else, something coppery and sickeningly familiar. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat in the kitchen, a knife clutched in my trembling hands, jumping at every sound. When dawn finally broke, I fled the house, driving back to my apartment in a panic. But I couldn't escape. Over the next few days, strange things began to happen. Objects would move when I wasn't looking. I'd catch glimpses of unfamiliar faces in reflective surfaces. And always, there was the feeling of being watched. I tried to rationalize it. Stress, lack of sleep, the shock of my grandfather's confession. Surely these could explain what I was experiencing. But deep down, I knew the truth. The villagers had followed me home. One night, about a week after my grandfather's death, I woke to find my bedroom filled with people. Men, women, children, all standing silently around my bed, their eyes fixed on me. Their clothes were outdated, dirty, and torn. And each of them bore the marks of violent death, bullet wounds, burn marks, crushed limbs. I wanted to scream, but no sound would come out. I was paralyzed, forced to meet their accusing stares. One of them, an old man with a gaping hole where his left eye should have been, stepped forward. "We have waited long for justice," he said, his voice a dry whisper. "Your grandfather escaped us in life. But you will pay his debt." I found my voice then, forcing words past my terror. "I'm not responsible for what he did. Please, I'm innocent." The old man's remaining eye narrowed. "Innocent? Perhaps. But you have benefited from his crimes. You have lived a life of comfort built on our bones. And now you will know our suffering." As he spoke, the others began to move closer, their hands reaching for me. I could feel their touch, cold, clammy, and undeniably real. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying for it to be a nightmare. When I opened them again, my room was empty. But the chill of their touch lingered on my skin. From that night on, my life became a waking nightmare. The villagers were always there, just at the edge of my vision. They would appear in crowds, making it impossible for me to tell which faces were real and which were something else. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. My work suffered. My friends grew concerned, then distant. I became obsessed with researching the village my grandfather had mentioned. I spent hours in libraries, scouring old newspapers and military records. Slowly, I pieced together the truth. The village had been small, of little strategic importance. But it had been in the way of a planned offensive. Rather than go around, the decision had been made to go through. My grandfather's unit had been tasked with clearing the area. What I found chilled me to the bone. There were no records of enemy combatants in the village. No weapons caches, no strategic installations. Just farmers, shopkeepers, families. All wiped out in a single day of violence. The official record listed it as a necessary military action. But I knew the truth. It had been a massacre, plain and simple. And my grandfather had been at the heart of it. As my investigation deepened, so did the haunting. The villagers were no longer content to simply watch. They began to interact with my world in increasingly terrifying ways. One morning, I woke to find my kitchen ransacked. Every dish was shattered, every piece of furniture overturned. On the wall, written in what looked horribly like blood, were words in a language I didn't understand. Another day, I came home to find all the faucets running at full blast, the floors flooded. The water was tinted red. My neighbors complained about screaming coming from my apartment at all hours of the night. I hadn't heard anything. I tried to get help. I went to a psychiatrist, but fled the office when I saw the ghostly faces of children peering out from behind the doctor's chair. I tried to talk to friends, but they edged away, clearly disturbed by the way my eyes would dart around, tracking movements they couldn't see. I was alone, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape. In desperation, I returned to my grandfather's house. If this had started there, perhaps it could end there as well. The house was exactly as I had left it, but it felt different now. The air was thick, oppressive. As I stepped inside, I could hear whispers coming from every shadow. I made my way to the study, my footsteps echoing in the empty house. The box of documents was still there, accusing in its innocence. I picked it up, my mind racing. Maybe if I exposed what had happened, if I brought the truth to light, the spirits would be appeased. As I turned to leave, I found my path blocked. The old man with the missing eye stood before me, but he wasn't alone. Behind him stretched a crowd of people, filling the hallway, the stairs, every space I could see. Men, women, children, all bearing the marks of violent death, all staring at me with eyes that burned with an unearthly light. "You know the truth now," the old man said. "What will you do with it?" I clutched the box to my chest. "I'll expose it," I said, my voice shaking. "I'll make sure everyone knows what really happened. Your story will be told." The old man nodded slowly. "It is a start," he said. "But not enough. Justice demands more than words. It demands blood." As he spoke, the crowd began to move forward. Hands reached for me, dozens, hundreds of hands, all cold as ice and strong as steel. I screamed as they grabbed me, trying to fight them off. But how do you fight ghosts? How do you escape the grip of the dead? They dragged me down the stairs, out of the house. I expected them to stop at the property line, but they didn't. They kept going, pulling me through streets that slowly transformed from my grandfather's suburban neighborhood to a war-torn village. The buildings around me were no longer neat houses with manicured lawns, but bombed-out shells. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of death. And everywhere I looked, there were bodies. Men, women, children, the very people who were dragging me forward. I realized with horror where they were taking me. In the center of the village was a large pit, filled with tangled limbs and vacant, staring eyes. A mass grave. No, I pleaded, trying to dig my heels in. But the ground beneath me offered no resistance. Please, I'm not him. I didn't do this. The old man appeared before me again. You carry his blood, he said. You have lived a life built on our deaths. Now you will join us. You will know our suffering. And through you, he will finally pay for his crimes. They pushed me forward, to the edge of the pit. I could feel hands on my back, an inexorable pressure pushing me towards the edge. I closed my eyes, bracing for the fall, but it never came. I opened my eyes to find myself back in my grandfather's study. The box of documents was still clutched to my chest. There was no sign of the villagers, no evidence of the nightmarish scene I had just experienced. For a moment, I dared to hope it had all been a hallucination, a product of stress and guilt and too little sleep. But then I saw it. On the desk, where there had been nothing before, was a single photograph. It showed a group of villagers, the same faces I had seen in my visions. They were smiling, alive, unaware of the fate that awaited them, and scrawled across the bottom, in handwriting I recognized as my grandfather's, were the words, "The truth must be told. The debt must be paid." I knew then what I had to do. The story of the village needed to be told. The truth needed to come to light. It wouldn't bring back the dead, wouldn't erase the horrors of the past. But it was a start. As I left the house, box of documents in hand, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The feeling of being watched, of being followed, was gone. But I knew it wasn't over. The villagers would be waiting, watching to see what I would do with the truth I now possessed. The war might have ended decades ago, but for some, the battle for justice was far from over. And I, granddaughter of a war criminal, had just been drafted to the front lines.